All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about one of James Allen's most, I think, powerful ideas, this concept of the greater world. Now, this isn't some far-off mystical place. It's actually a really practical way of thinking, a mental framework that can literally expand what feels possible in your day-to-day life. So let's get into it. You know that feeling, right? That sense of being stuck. Like you're just getting pushed around by events, by people, by everything. James Allen had a great phrase for this. He called it being buffeted by circumstances. It's that feeling when your world just seems to shrink and you feel like you're running out of options. But here's the big question. What if that feeling isn't about reality? What if it's really just about a belief you're holding? So Allen lays out this incredible idea. We're always living in one of two worlds. And the wild part is the choice is completely up to us. On one hand, you've got the small world. This is that mental space where you're just reacting to everything, feeling limited, feeling trapped. But then there's the greater world. And this is a state of being that's defined by principle, where life suddenly feels expansive and, well, free. The most important thing to get here is that it's not your external conditions that make your world big or small. It's your internal state. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll really dig into these two worlds we live in. Then we'll talk about the secret to unlocking that greater world, what's called the power of inner rule. After that, we'll make it super practical, looking at how to use this stuff in daily life. And finally, I'll give you a simple reset you can use anytime. All right, first up, let's really understand this state we all want to get out of, right? The small world. And just to be clear, this isn't some physical location. It's a psychological trap, one we fall right into whenever we start believing that we're just creatures of our circumstances, just reacting to whatever life decides to throw our way. And here's how this trap works. It's a feedback loop. It's this vicious cycle of reactivity. Think about it. Something happens on the outside, and it triggers an uncontrolled thought on the inside. You do that enough times, and that thought hardens into a reactive habit. And then, that habit starts to create the very circumstances that made you feel trapped in the first place. It's this perfect self-fulfilling prophecy of feeling powerless. And this really gets to the heart of it. That feeling of being a victim, being pushed around by the world. Allen says that's a belief, not a fact. It's a story we tell ourselves. He argues that the very moment you stop believing you're just a creature of circumstance, that's when the buffeting stops. That's when you can start to take your power back. Okay, so if it's a belief, how do we change it? How do we actually make that shift? Well, this brings us to the main event, the core concept here, the inner rule. This is it. This is the key that unlocks the door from that small, reactive world and lets you step into the big, expansive one. So what on earth is an inner rule? You can think of it like your own personal constitution, a guiding principle you choose to live by. It's a value that you deliberately place in that tiny gap between something happening and your reaction to it. It's this little act of self-government that creates a pause. And in that pause, that's where you find the freedom to choose your response, instead of just getting triggered automatically. Allen loved his metaphors, and my favorite is the mind as a garden. You can either let the weeds run wild, or you can become the master gardener, right? Intentionally planting the seeds you want to grow. Well, this inner rule, it's about becoming the master weaver of your own character. You're consciously choosing the threads of thought that you weave together, and those threads ultimately become the fabric of your reality. So let's get super practical. How does this actually work, moment to moment? It's basically a three-step process. First, something happens, an external stimulus. Step 2 is the magic part. You pause. Instead of that knee-jerk reaction, you just stop. And in that pause, you consult your inner rule, that principle you've chosen. And then, step 3, you choose a response that actually lines up with that principle. It's funny, this sounds a lot like a modern psych concept called implementation intentions, which is basically creating an if this happens, then I will do that plan. Allen was way ahead of his time. Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but what does it look like in the real world? Because an idea is only good if you can actually use it, right? So let's walk through 3 super common scenarios where an inner rule can totally change the game, at work, in our relationships, and with our own personal habits. All right, first up, a professional setback. Picture this. You get some tough, unexpected feedback on a project you poured your heart into, or maybe a big initiative you were leading just fails. That initial gut reaction is probably going to be disappointment, maybe even some fear. And right here, you're at a fork in the road. The small world response is that classic reaction, blame, fear, self-pity. And that just leads to stagnation. You get stuck. But the greater world response, let's say it's guided by a principle like every obstacle is an opportunity, that changes everything. Suddenly, you're not defeated, you're curious, you're focused on learning. And that's how you turn what looks like a failure into real growth and resilience. Okay, next scenario, let's talk relationships. We've all been there, a disagreement with your partner, a friend, a family member, they say something that stings or they just totally misunderstand you. And what's that immediate impulse? Get defensive, right? Put the walls up. This is where an inner rule can be so powerful. The small world response is exactly that, defensiveness, pointing fingers, which just builds up resentment and distance. But what if your inner rule was something like seek to understand before being understood? Or even just choose kindness? Your whole reaction shifts. Instead of a fight, it becomes about empathy. And that leads to connection, not a bigger wedge between you. And for our last example, let's look at something we all struggle with. Changing a personal habit. Trying to exercise more, or maybe finally breaking that procrastination cycle. You start out all motivated, and then you slip up. It happens. Now, the small world reaction to that slip up is pure frustration. It's that all or nothing thinking where you just go, well, I messed up, might as well quit. And boom, you've abandoned the goal. But Alan's whole idea that thought eventually becomes habit, well, that requires an inner rule of patience. It means choosing self-compassion instead of beating yourself up. That allows for gradual progress. Every small action you take that's aligned with your goal builds momentum. And slowly, very slowly, you start building a new identity. Okay, the good news is this is absolutely a skill you can train. So to help you get started, like today, I want to give you a really simple technique you can use anytime you feel yourself getting pulled back into that small, reactive world. Here's the reset. It's just a few quick steps. First, just notice the feeling. Acknowledge it. The anger, the frustration, whatever it is. That's your cue. That's the small world calling. Step 2. Name the principle you'd rather live by. That's your inner rule. Then third, ask yourself this really simple question. What's one small thing I can do right now that lines up with my rule? And finally, step 4, do that thing. Just take that one small action. Look, this isn't about fixing the entire situation at once. It's about making one single conscious choice to pivot from reaction to principle. All right, so let's tie this all together. What have we learned? Your world, how you perceive it, is shaped by your thoughts. That small world is just a state of uncontrolled reaction. You get to the greater world by using a chosen inner rule to guide your responses. And this is not some magical thing. It's a practical skill you can learn. At the end of the day, you are the architect of your own inner world. Look, getting a handle on our thoughts is, well, it's a lifelong journey, isn't it? But now you have a framework. You understand the difference between the small and the greater worlds. It's like having a map and a compass. And if you want to keep exploring this, we put together a whole playlist on these ideas just for you. But this whole discussion leads to one final, really powerful question. If practicing this inner rule is the training, what's the end game? What happens when this becomes second nature? When this discipline blossoms into a state of just unwavering calm, no matter what storms are raging outside? Well, that state actually has a name. It's called serenity. And that is exactly what we are going to explore next.